Hi, I'm Nan Fitzpatrick, a guest on Aunties from the Golden West, and today we are going to talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Welcome, Nan. This is Teresa Boschert, and I'm one of the Aunties from the Golden West, and I want to tell you, our listeners, a little bit about Nan. Nan Fitzpatrick is an elementary school general music educator and has been for over 8 years. Her training is in community development and health behavior. She has degrees from both the University of California, Davis and the University of Michigan in behavioral science and diversity and community empowerment and public health. She served both the County of Sacramento and the State of California as a tobacco control advocate for many years before following her passion for music education. She lives in Sacramento with her husband and children and proudly serves on the Songworks Educators Association presidential team. We also have with us today, of course, the other auntie from the Golden West, Diane Kaiser. Hi, Diane.
Oh, hello, listeners. Yes, the other auntie is here, and we're going to be discussing ACEs with Nan. Nan, what is ACEs, and how did it evolve?
Well, Diane, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And that term was coined from a study that was run by the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Healthcare back in 1998. And what the study discovered was that adults who experienced one of 10 adverse childhood experiences before the age of 18 were more likely to develop disease symptoms later in life. Those 10 adverse childhood experiences are in 3 categories. The first is abuse, the second is neglect, and the third is household challenges. More specifically, they're talking about physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Let's see, physical neglect, emotional neglect, and then different experiences in the household. For example, divorce or separation, an incarcerated parent, substance abuse by a family member, domestic violence, and then also mental illness in the family.
And Nan, when we were talking earlier, you took a moment to say to us, when we hear these descriptors, sometimes we get a little vision in our heads of what the family that might be experiencing this looks like. And you clarified that for us, that it's not necessarily what we think.
Right, Teresa. There are 2 very important pieces of this research. And one is that ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, are extremely common. More than 60% of Americans have experienced at least one of these. The other thing is that it doesn't matter if you have come from a low income, middle income, or high income family, whether you've grown up in a rural area, suburban, or urban, what ethnicity you are. ACEs affect more Americans than not. Like I said, 67% have experienced at least one, and more than 15% have had 4 or more. The most fascinating part of this study is that the more childhood experiences, adverse experiences that someone has experienced, the greater their risk for experiencing physical health impacts later in life. These ACEs not only affect how people develop relationships, it also impacts their cardiovascular health, their neurological health, their endocrine system, which regulates your hormones, also their immune system. And so when we think about, as a society, helping people have healthier lives, we really need to not only look at their symptoms that they have right now, but look back to what happened to them as children. So I found this so fascinating because I am one of the people that have experienced one or more ACEs.
Right. And when you talk about the physical effects later in life, the health effects of adverse childhood experiences, I just wanted to say, I even heard the other day someone saying that we not only have to address our memories of these things, but our mental memories, but our body memories, and that a lot of those kind of memories reside in our parasympathetic nervous system.
That's right. We'll back up a second and say that adverse childhood experiences, abuse or neglect, or living in a household where there's violence, those things absolutely affect our emotions. But they also affect our nervous system. And this is where the study gets interesting. Our nervous system is the part of our brain that deals with stress and our stress response to something. When we are constantly feeling threatened, we go into what you've probably heard of as fight or flight or freeze, where we get a rush of adrenaline and our body's basically built to survive that experience. And so that adrenaline helps us, get out of a dangerous situation quickly or stay still and quiet if that's what serves us. What happens with adverse childhood experiences for folks, especially if they've had more than one, is that our body is in a constant state of fight or flight or freeze, which means that we have a toxic level of those stress hormones in our body. Our body doesn't know how to get rid of them if we're in a constant state of stress. And it's that constant toxic level of the stress hormones that end up impacting all of those body systems that we just talked about, our immune system, our cardiovascular system. And so they end up leading to heart disease later in life, diabetes later in life, or at least a higher risk for those things. If we experience adverse childhood events, it doesn't mean we will absolutely have heart disease, but it does increase our risk. And so knowing about these things in our lives helps us understand how better to respond to them so that we can have a healthier life.
So let me just say, if I can, to follow up on what you've just shared with us, Nan, that I read a little article that said just exactly that. We do this fight, flight, or freeze, and it brings up all these chemicals within our body. And in our modern society, we oftentimes then are told, but don't show it. Don't let anybody know that you feel that way, because it's not that we're in a forest somewhere and there's a bear chasing us. It's that we're in family setting or we're in a work setting and something has happened that comes across as kind of an aggressive situation, and we're taught, oh no, don't show it though. You feel scared, don't show it. Or that was just a little bit of a traumatic thing you just had. You aren't allowed to literally shake it off in the moment. You just pack it in. You just hold on to it.
Right. I want to direct your listeners to a wonderful book called The Deepest Well, written by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She is a Canadian-American pediatrician and has been the Surgeon General of California for the last few years. And she is the former Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Youth Wellness. Dr. Harris pioneered treatment for toxic stress in her clinic for her young patients as she realized that they were, in fact, dealing with toxic levels of stress due to many of the harmful things that her clientele happened to be experiencing. And she found that helping her patients and their families regulate their nervous systems helped them deal with toxic levels of stress and would probably prevent harmful side effects down the line. So some of the elements of her treatment included talk therapy for both parents and children, meditation, which helps. And when I say meditation, it doesn't have to fit into any particular tradition or religion. It basically is a mindfulness technique that includes deep breathing. So it can be a form of prayer or yoga, but some type of meditation, exercise, joyful participation like music, roller skating, anything that can move your body and bring joy. These were the types of things that she incorporated into her pediatric clinic so that it wasn't just ADHD medicine for attention deficit disorder, but it was looking into how to heal the toxic stress levels for her patients. And any one of us, whether we have an ACE score of 1 or 10, any one of us can benefit from those types of interventions to help regulate our nervous systems. Because as we all know from this last year of being in lockdown due to a pandemic, reckoning with social injustice in our country, all of us have been experiencing trauma on one level or another.
Yes, we have.
Yes, thank you for that. And let me take just a moment here to say this is a conversation that we're having and discussing common impacts of adverse childhood experiences. We are not giving professional advice during this conversation. This is just three friends having a conversation about this, but it's a topic that's so interesting to us, and we feel like it's interesting to other people too. But this is not professional advice that we're giving. And as a matter of fact, if any of our listeners are feeling extra stress about anything, we really do want to remind everyone that here in California, we have a mental health 24-hour crisis line. And in Sacramento, the number for that is area code 916-881-4881. And for our listeners around the United States, there is a national crisis line as well, and that number is 1-800-273-TALK. That's 800-273-8255. And we do also rely on the fact that for our international listeners, there are resources like this in every country in the world, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need them. But we do want to just get back to our discussion here, because Nan, you had told us one other thing that was interesting, and that was when people look at ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, a lot of times some of us begin to go immediately to large dramatic experiences. Oh, clearly that was something. But you used the word or brought us to the idea about microaggressions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the ACE study is a broad way to look at the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the health of both children and adults. I was listening to an interview with Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. They wrote a book together called What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. We all know who Oprah Winfrey is, I believe. She is a media mogul in the United States and around the world. Dr. Perry is the principal of the Neurosequential Network, a senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy, and a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the School of Medicine at Northwestern University. And he has many other titles as well. But in this interview between Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, Dr. Perry talked about how any trauma that we experience can be a big T trauma or a small t trauma. And what he meant by that is that if you live through a war, a natural disaster, that could be considered a big T trauma. There's no debate as to whether or not that was a severe thing to live through. He notes that any one of us might have a slightly different impact on our lives than the person next to us, even going through the same experience based on the family that we grew up in or the tools that we have to deal with stress. But that's a big T trauma, and obviously would affect our nervous system with levels of stress, as we discussed before, because that would be a frightening thing to go through. But Dr. Perry makes the distinction from big T traumas to little T traumas. And little T traumas, he says, are these things like microaggressions against, in this culture, perhaps it could be women or people of color, that coming from perhaps a family with no trauma whatsoever, an accumulation of microaggressions, racism, sexism, transphobia, these things can activate the stress response just like a big T trauma. So as a teacher myself, I'm thinking about what kind of environment can I provide for my students that obviously prevent big T traumas, but also little T traumas. And I had to ask myself what role I could play, and I'm hoping that our listeners might consider that same question for whatever position they are in, whether they have students or clients or family members. Because when we look at the role of trauma in our lives, the only way that we can really address it is to be able to build strong and secure relationships. And if we are purposely or inadvertently leaving people out or making them feel unsafe or insecure, then we're actually contributing to the detriment of their health.
Yeah. You know, that bringing up Oprah, we all know Oprah and what she's done, and oh my gosh, and I bet she had both micro and macro. And her ability to be able to address some of this thing. And I realize, you know, she's got the resources. She's well positioned in society. So, of course, naturally, she'd be able to access help. But generally speaking, would you say that counseling would be one of the things that would actually help to ameliorate some of the very deep effects when you started? And when do people realize that I don't want to say a victim, but when do people realize that they have been aced?
Well, there's are two very important questions, Diane. One was, when do people come to realize that they may have experienced one of these adverse experiences? And the second question, I believe you said, was, does talk therapy or psychotherapy help? And I will just remind our listeners that I am a lay person. When it comes to this topic, I'm interested in it as a human being and also as a teacher and a parent. But I can speak as a lay person to those two questions. I want to direct folks, if they're interested, to a website called numberstory.org. numberstory.org. This website allows folks to look at the ACEs and determine whether or not they have experienced one or more and what that might mean for their current and future health. It also talks about how that ACE number, whether it's 1, 2, 5, 7, or 10, isn't the thing that defines us.
Good point.
Yeah, it talks about like what is the story behind the number and what might knowing that story do for us, for our own health, and so that we can fill our toolbox with more tools to keep from passing on any behaviors that might impact our children or the people around us in our family. So to your second question, does talk therapy help? I certainly use it, and it helps me figure out that story behind that number so that I can build, like I said, build up my tools in my toolbox to better deal with toxic stress, better deal with anything that might, trigger a bad feeling, or just kind of deal with those regular bad days that we all have. Avoiding adversity isn't the ultimate goal because we're humans and it's normal to struggle. It's normal to have adversity. It's normal to have bad days or set a goal and try for something and work hard and fail and try again. All of that kind of builds our emotional muscles. And so the goal isn't to take adversity away from ourselves or to take it away from our children. Our kids also, it's normal to struggle. But to limit these severe and detrimental adverse conditions for children or to deal with them as adults, that is the goal. In fact, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has come up with some recommendations for how to prevent ACEs in the first place, and I'd love to share some of them with you and our listening audience.
Yes, we're listening. We'd love to
We're
hear
here.
that. Yeah. And as you gather those, let me just say, I'd just like to second your statement about counseling. We just call it kind of counseling, but seeking someone with professional background to talk to. I do the same, and I consider it just a normal part of self-care, just like trying to get out there and walk every day or whatever it is. And I hope that that's where we're beginning to go. So thank you for bringing us these.
Sure thing. So again, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, talks about different strategies for preventing ACEs or adverse childhood experiences in our communities. And it's interesting to me that a lot of them fall in a policy category. Whereas if we had better policies from a local, state, and federal level, we might be able to prevent some of these ACEs in future generations. For example, if we could strengthen household financial security, they say, we might reduce ACEs. If we had stronger public education campaigns, if we had legislative approaches to reduce corporal punishment, that might reduce ACEs. If we had high-quality childcare and preschool enrichment with family engagement, that could reduce ACEs. If we had social emotional learning as a regular part of our children's instruction, and even their parents, that could reduce ACEs. Mentoring programs, after-school programs, better primary care, and family-centered treatment for substance abuse disorders. All of these things, according to the Centers for Disease Control, could prevent ACEs. So what is the individual to do? I mean, I personally don't know that I can enhance primary care, but I can certainly think about how to use my vote on the local, state, and federal level to bring people into office that can create legislative policy that might help these issues. I could certainly advocate for my teachers in my schools and my school board to get the proper instruction that they need to provide trauma-informed and social-emotional learning for students. There's lots of ways that we can be advocates for each other in addition to doing our own work to heal ourselves if we have experienced these things ourselves.
Yeah. I love it that you just said that, because I'm sitting here listening to you thinking, oh, great, we do want to take care of ourselves and do the best we can in ourselves and our families, but we are not an island. None of us are an island. We are part of something larger, and that translates into policy, public policy.
That's right.
I love that. That's a real eye-opener. Thanks for that one. Yeah. And Diane, you come from a social work background.
Yes.
So you probably were already well aware of that.
Well, I like the degrees that, like, there are degrees of ACEs, and I think that there are some deep dives in ACEs that could set you off. I don't want to go crazy talking about some of the people that have had very deep ACEs experience, but if you ever read about Sirhan, extremely deep situations with ACEs in his family. And that's true. But then somebody, and I bring her up again because she's overcome, I think, in many ways, Oprah Winfrey. And she didn't always do it while she was a wealthy woman.
Right.
She began at an early age to address this. And her traumas were things that I don't want to say most of us, but a lot of us did not experience.
No, she's very open about her experiences in her book, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. She talks about what she says saved her, and those were those positive relationships with people, her teachers, people at her church, that gave her a voice and a sense of purpose and place that she didn't necessarily get at home. And she says without those relationships, she might not have been able to find her voice both figuratively and literally.
Yeah. In fact, I think that she had said at some point her associations with people outside her family built confidence. And she said that was a huge thing. Even a tiny little bit of confidence, a small success. And obviously it worked.
I was thinking about this quote, and I probably won't have it just right, but I imagine you've heard something like this before. Treat everyone as if they are struggling, because they probably are. I think that quote sums up all of this science in the perfect way, because we all struggle and we all have a story, some of them, as we've said, more severe than others. But how we respond to ourselves and each other is really about building that relationship. And if we can be those people in other people's lives, like Oprah had in her church and her school, we don't have to be the neuroscientist or the pediatrician or the elected official to still make a positive difference in helping others find the resilience that they need to overcome both the big T and the small t traumas in their lives.
Sometimes even 4 words can make a difference in people's life. Honey, that was great.
Yes. And that whole idea that it's not, I know it is science, but it's not rocket science to be kind to one another. It's, it's like, oh, that's something we can all do. And it actually makes a difference for all of us. And know that we're going to have to draw our conversation to a close here pretty soon. And I just want to say, number one, we really want to have you back and continue more of this, Nan. It's so cool.
It is great.
And I just want to reiterate that we're not giving professional advice. This is all friends talking about an important topic. And so we do want to say once again that if anybody is feeling that they need to reach out for some help, there are many ways to do that. And I'm going to give a couple of phone numbers, but when we begin to close, after Nan offers whatever else she would like to on this, I would love to have her tell us some of these books again, just rename these books as resources. But in terms of other immediate resources, here in California, we do have the Mental Health 24-Hour Crisis Line. Phone number 916-881-4881. 916-881-4881. And the U.S. National Crisis Line, 1-800-273-TALK. So, Nan, I want to give it back to you and just let you tell us whatever else you would like to about this. And then please do tell us what people can do to reach out.
Well, thank you, Aunties from the Golden West, for having me on today to talk about this topic of ACEs that interests me personally and professionally. I, like I said before, jumped into this because a friend said, hey, you and I both experienced some of this. Let's find out more about it. And it's been a really positive journey in looking into how to help my own health and those of my family and my community. So I want to offer those book titles again, things that I've read and have found interesting for our listeners. The first is What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry. The second is The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Harris. And I want to, again, invite folks to check out the website numberstory.org to look into their own ACE number and the story behind it to find out how they can explore better health outcomes for themselves and their families.
That's really great. And, Nan, I don't actually think anyone, even listeners, have totally escaped ACEs. There may be micros, but boy, they have added to how we conduct our lives. And I thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. For the first time, I actually understand ACEs. I've been hearing it thrown around for a few years, but I've appreciated hearing this, and I'm going to use some of your resources.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there we are, concluding another session of Aunties from the Golden West. And really, resilience is my new favorite word. I mean, that's a superpower right there. So we thank you so much, Nan, and really do want to invite you to come back. We would just love to continue more of this.
Also, there's the holiday show. So maybe we'll have a little, by the way, for listeners, Nan is also a fab vocalist. So I think that like maybe we can have, you'll hear Nan again, either speaking or singing.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.